Hi, this is Welcome to Self, and I'm your host, Dr. Hayley D. Quinn, fellow human, business owner, clinical psychologist, and coach. Welcome to Self is a place where you can come and learn about the practices that assist us as humans. Realise that you're not alone in the ways you struggle, and have your curiosity piqued on various topics as I chat to wonderful guests or bring you solo episodes. This is a place to remember that you are human first and have different roles in your life that need your attention. And for that, you need to take care of yourself in the best way you can. My aim is that this is a place of nourishment, growth, and nurture. A place where you can welcome yourself. Hi, welcome to the episode. It's really great to be back, and this time I'm bringing you another guest. I reached out to my next guest on Twitter, and she very graciously replied to a random stranger and agreed to come on my podcast, so I'm excited to bring this one to you. Dr. Valerie Young is widely regarded as the thought leader on imposter syndrome and co-founder of Impostor Syndrome Institute, with the mission of stamping out imposter syndrome. She's shared her insightful and practical advice with over 500,000 people around the world, including at such diverse organisations as Google, Pfizer, Boeing, Intel, Facebook, Microsoft, Chrysler, BP, T. Rowe Price, IBM, HelloFresh, JP Morgan, NASA, the National Cancer Institute, and the NBA, as well as at over 100 universities in the US, Canada, Europe, Japan, and the UK, including Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and Oxford. Her award-winning book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women and Men, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It, with Random House, is available in 6 languages, and her advice has appeared in dozens of major media outlets from India to Brazil, including BBC Radio, CNN, Money, Time, Newsweek, The New York Times, Science, Chicago Tribune, and the Sydney Morning Herald. As you can see, very accomplished woman. Valerie earned her doctoral degree in education from the University of Massachusetts, where she studied internal barriers to women's occupational achievement. Although her research subjects consisted of a racially diverse group of professional women, much of Valerie's original findings have proved directly applicable to anyone with imposter feelings. No stranger to entrepreneurship, she launched her first online business in 1998, which she then sold in 2020. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Valerie to the podcast. So hi, Valerie. Thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast. I randomly reached out to you on Twitter after reading your book, and you very graciously replied to a random stranger and agreed to come onto my podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm honored that you asked.
Fantastic. So could we please start perhaps with you telling us a little bit about yourself? What led you to becoming an expert in imposter syndrome and co-founding the Impostor Syndrome Institute?
Sure. I can't say I ever set out to be an expert on imposter syndrome. It really kind of stemmed from my own need to understand, what was happening for me as a young doctoral student, and quickly discovered a lot of people felt the same way. So my degree is in education, unlike a lot of people like yourselves who are psychologists in this field. So my impetus was to really apply what I'd learned from my research and create what I now realize is probably the first educational solution, educational intervention, if you will, to imposter syndrome. It's morphed and changed and over the years, but it's something that the approach seems to resonate with people. There's obviously a lot of people go to therapy for imposter phenomena or get coaching. But this is really the direction that I decided to go.
Yeah, fantastic. So what would you say are the most common features of imposter syndrome? Because I do think it's something that many, if not all of us, at some point in our lives will experience.
Yeah, I mean, a majority of people do. There are people who have the opposite problem, irrational self-confidence syndrome, right? Right, their
Yeah.
belief in their knowledge and skills far exceeds their actual knowledge and skills. But it's a great question because a lot of people mistakenly see imposter syndrome as kind of synonymous with the normal nervousness ahead of, let's say a job interview or making a presentation. And it's more than that. It really fundamentally comes down to this kind of core, often kind of, secret from the world belief that we're not as intelligent, capable, competent, talented, qualified as other people seem to think we are. And what is so fascinating, as you know, about imposter syndrome is that we have this belief despite concrete, sometimes overwhelming evidence of our past accomplishments or our abilities. So people who feel like imposters have become very adept at essentially saying, sure, I did it, right? Sure, I'm successful, but I can explain all that. So they externalize their accomplishments, chalk them up to things like luck, timing, computer error, personality, connections, and then when they do succeed, they have this fear that they're going to be found out.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I can relate to that. I actually dropped out of school and then ended up going to university and completing a PhD. But during my time at uni, I can remember when things would come back and they'd been marked. If I did well, which I did do well at uni, I was used to think, oh, I got the easy marker. They probably
Right,
didn't read mine properly. They just skimmed through and just gave me a good mark because they wanted to have it finished
right,
rather
right.
than recognizing it as my work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard people say, well, they know I'm a single mom and I'm working two jobs, so they're being lenient. They feel sorry for me, so they're not being very rigorous in their grading.
Yeah. Well, I was a single mum when I was at university. I never thought that one. I never thought of the sympathy angle, but there you go. Had I, that would have been another one I'd have added to my reasons
Ex-
why I'd done well. So what
Exactly.
do you think are some of the things that you see and recognize as imposter syndrome that maybe people wouldn't recognize for themselves?
I think partly what I see is the behaviors. People often are unconscious about how it shows up in the form of behaviors, that these feelings translate into behaviors. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who, as you know, are the two clinical psychologists who first coined the term imposter phenomenon in 1978, they identified different, what they call common coping and protecting strategies or mechanisms or behaviors. I've added a few to those based on my observations over the years. But what people don't often recognize is that sometimes things like overworking, over preparing, I mean, I'm not talking about good old fashioned hard work, but the sense that, I have to work harder than other people to be I'm not as intelligent, or procrastination on important things. I mean, we all procrastinate, but this is where there's kind of this sense that if I do it at the last minute and it's successful, then I think I've fooled them, right? But if it reflects my lack of time and effort, then I have kind of a built-in excuse. For a lot of people, and I see this especially with women, not uniquely, is another behavior is kind of flying under the radar, kind of holding back, not going for challenging opportunities or assignments, not speaking up in class or meetings, not starting or growing a business or getting our art to a gallery. This sense if I can kind of keep my head down, play small, they won't find me out because all of these strategies are designed to help us manage the anxiety of kind of waiting to be found out and actually avoid being found out.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly see that in my work, supervising other health professionals, but also coaching business women. That is some of the stuff, isn't it? Play small, stay small.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, it's safer there, right? If you kind of
yeah,
pop your head out, it's kind of a little bit of the tall poppy syndrome, right? That you pop your
yeah,
head out, there's consequences, and you could be disappointed or humiliated or fail, and people might judge you.
yeah. And I think that feeling, isn't it? If I pop my head out, then actually I might get found out that I'm a fraud and I'm an imposter.
Oh,
So I'll just stay
absolutely.
down here and stay small. So, in your vast experience with this, what sorts of things have you seen imposter syndrome impact for people? And we've talked about some of them now, but what have been the impacts of this on people's lives, do you think?
That's a really good question because I don't think people are as tuned into that as they should be, that there really are costs and consequences for individuals, but also for organizations. So on the individual side, I mean, if you're chronically overworking, and I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about good old fashioned hard work.
Yeah.
But if you are overworking, over preparing, there's health consequences. It means you're not leaving time for other things that are important in your life, whether it's exercise or relationships. Um, if you chronically procrastinate, sooner or later, probably some ball is going to get dropped and there's going to be a price there. Certainly, if you're flying under the radar, and I would say there's a financial cost for any of those behaviors, but there's especially a financial cost there. But you don't get your work out into the world. You don't see how far you could have gone, or good, bad, or indifferent, right? To
Yeah.
get that information that you need. And I would say there's a cost for everyone because, as I always say, everybody loses when bright people play small. But increasingly, organizations, and you asked at the top why I decided to start Impostor Syndrome Institute, it's really to kind of bring the work into organizations, whether it's universities or major corporations, and help them understand that there's kind of a missing link with a lot of focus on psychological safety right now, which has to do with the organization taking steps to make people feel safe, asking questions or making mistakes. But there's really nothing happening on the individual side to help them shift their thinking so they're also more comfortable speaking out, asking questions, failing, and so on.
Yeah. So there's lots of impact, isn't there, on lots of different levels? And I think when you were just saying, if people don't put their work out into the world, good, bad, or indifferent, I think if we're not showing up as ourselves, we're not getting the feedback we need to get actually a true picture as well of who we are and where we're at, are we?
You're absolutely right. And for people who feel like imposters, for many of us, even constructive feedback, which let's face it, feels like criticism to us, can be deeply wounding. I think we let it be more about who we are as a person. So if somebody says your work was inadequate, we hear, I'm inadequate.
Yeah.
But the only way we're going to get the information we need to get better is to get feedback, whether it's from the marketplace or from other people, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would you share with someone who struggles with imposter syndrome in order for them to help themselves?
I think the first thing that I would point out is that the statistic that's thrown around most often is that 70% of people have had these feelings at one time or another. And so in some arenas, it's even higher than that. But the point I would make to them is that that means we're in the majority. So the question is like, what's up with the other 30? Like, why aren't we studying them? Right. So some part of that 30 does have that other problem I talked about, that irrational self-confidence syndrome. But there's another part of that group who's a minority within a minority who we do want to better understand. Those are people who have genuinely never felt like an imposter and who are genuinely humble. And I think that the awareness that there are people out there who don't feel like imposters is important because we often conflate confidence and competence. In other words, we think if I was really competent, I wouldn't feel like an imposter.
Yeah.
So the fact that I even feel like an imposter was proof I must be one, right? Because we think, competence means being confident 24/7. And in fact, it doesn't.
No, no. Wow. Um, so what would you say is the most important thing for people then to know about imposter syndrome? I mean, obviously it's that this thing of you're not alone in this. This is really a very common phenomenon for people. But what do you think is the most important thing people need to know?
Yeah, well, you nailed one right there. This notion, like, wait a minute, there's a name for this.
Yeah.
If other people feel the same way, that can be very liberating. But along with that, and I'm always reluctant to say this in front of a psychologist, but I think imposter syndrome has been over psychologized.
Uh-huh.
I think we need to step back and do less psychologizing and more contextualizing to help people understand the kind of perfectly good reasons why they or others might experience imposter feelings. And honestly, I struggle with sometimes people I hear on other podcasts or on LinkedIn who say with great confidence that, the core of imposter syndrome is this inherent sense of unworthiness, or your parents shamed you, and that's why you feel like an imposter. And I'm like, so does that mean people in STEM who are much more likely to experience imposter feelings feel more unworthy, or people in creative fields, or students as a segment of the population for whom are much more likely to feel like imposters? I mean, never mind understanding the social realities of there's reasons why women, people of color, folks with disabilities, people who are first generation professionals, maybe people who are doing work or business or school in another language are more likely to feel like imposters, connected to stereotypes and not having the sense of belonging. So I think we need to kind of zoom out sometimes and get the view from 20,000 feet. Flip the question from not why do I feel like an imposter, but how could I not?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think you're talking to a psychologist who would agree with you there. I
Good.
think very much. I think we over psychologize a lot of things. And I think you're absolutely spot on. I think context matters so much in so many of the things that we struggle with and suffer with as human beings, whether that is our early life experiences or whether that's the context we're in within the social or organizational worlds that we're living in as adults. So, yeah, I would agree with you on that as well.
Absolutely. Can I share a quick example?
Yeah,
I did a podcast for the British Medical Society, I think it was, and there was a medical student and a second or third year physician also on the podcast, and they were lamenting the lack of positive feedback you get in medicine, especially
yeah,
in medical school, and how hard you work in medical school. And at the end, you take an exam, and in the UK, the best you can do, the highest grade you can get, is no concern.
yeah,
We have no concern about you. Like that's the top you can get, right? So I want to empathize with them and say, yeah, that sucks, right? You work so hard and you get no positive feedback whatsoever. I said, on the other hand, if you know that that's the organizational context you're in, that's the culture, it allows you to step back and say, okay, I didn't know this was the culture I was going into when I signed up, but this is the culture I'm in. It is not about me. It is about the culture, again, so we can do less personalizing and more contextualizing.
yeah. I love that it's not about me. I had an experience a few years ago. A colleague, Deborah Lee, who is in the compassion focused therapy field, I had wanted to start doing more training and workshops and was experiencing a lot of anxiety around that. And some of that, of course, was my like, who am I to be doing these workshops and training, and my own imposter syndrome showing up. And she quite bluntly turned around to me and said, well, it's not about you, Hayley. Which has still, I mean, this is quite a few years ago now, has proved to be one of the most helpful things that anyone has ever said to me, because it puts it into context for me now that when I'm going to do a training or when I'm doing the podcast or when I'm putting on a workshop or whatever it might be, when my own anxiety starts to show up, I remind myself I have information and knowledge that could be really helpful for somebody that's going to be listening. Now, not everyone might like it, and that's okay. But the person or people that need to hear that from me and are going to be there need me to show up. If I get too anxious and decide I'm not going to do it, then not only do I miss out, like you were saying earlier, on living the life I want to live because I do want to do more of this kind of work, but also the people that would have been there to hear what they needed to hear are going to miss out as well.
I love that. And there was something you said, which I thought was really important, is not everybody is going to benefit from what you have to say. And that's okay. I've given talks, the exact same talk. I went to British Columbia, did a 5 city tour. It was completely different in each city. Some cities, they were so excited, they were bouncing off the walls. It was great. Other times, they kind of arms folded, not laughing. I want to say, are you kidding me? That joke killed at the University of Iowa. But it was a good reminder that it's not always you, right? And
Yeah.
I don't love everyone's art or books or acting. Why should everyone love me and my work? So I thought that was really important, that piece of what you said too.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. And again, it takes the pressure off you as well. I'm not going to try and please everybody. I'm
Yeah,
going
and
to
you can't.
provide what I have to provide, and some people will take from that, and other people will just leave it on the table, and you know, they'll never get that time back in their life, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes good enough is good enough.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So in your career, you were an early pioneer of diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Could you talk to that intersection between imposter syndrome and diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Sure. Back in the day when I was doing that work, I was a graduate student in the College of Education at the University of Massachusetts, and we didn't call it DE&I or diversity and inclusion. We called it oppression.
Yeah,
And we were learning, we were just calling it what it was. And
yeah,
we were designing and delivering adult education learning experiences on not just racism and sexism, but homophobia and heterosexism, ableism, classism, anti-Semitism. So we had these kind of models and frameworks around identity development theory and working through different social issues and our looking at our own attitudes, our own behaviors, and being allies and so on. Um, so it's always been the frame I brought to this conversation. My dissertation was interviewing 15 professional women, and this was in the early 1980s.
yeah,
And over half of my subjects were women of color, which was very unusual back then. So much research was really done with, white students and rats,
yeah,
basically, and then extrapolated to the entire planet. So I very much see it as something. The consideration is that whenever you're on the receiving end of stereotypes about competence or intelligence, you're going to be more vulnerable to imposter syndrome. And on some level, certainly to different degrees, but on some level, everybody knows what that feels like. So in my talks, for example, I'll say, how many of you have ever felt underestimated because you were the youngest person in an achievement environment? And, we've all know what that feels like. I mean, because of stereotypes, right? And I'll
yeah,
say, how many of you have been the oldest person and felt underestimated? When I asked that question to Facebook employees, the 30-year-olds raised their hand. So it's all relative. But because
yeah,
of stereotypes, because not always having a sense of belonging, those factors also contribute to imposter feelings.
yeah. Gosh, I think that's so important for people to know and understand as well, isn't it? That it makes sense that if you are in a group that is stereotyped, if you are in a minority group, this is more likely going to be your experience.
Yeah, I'm not going to say the name of the agency, but they deal with nuclear energy, and it's a very male dominated environment, as you can imagine. It's a lot of scientists and STEM, and so they took some kind of assessment from a consultant, and the women tested far higher for like not valuing their work and not seeing themselves as valuable than was the norm in other industries and even kind of globally, right? And I think they think a lot has to do with being a very distinct minority in that organization.
Mm.
I don't know if you're familiar with a concept called stereotype threat. It was pioneered by Claude Steele from Stanford University. And just briefly, what they found is that the fear of confirming a negative stereotype causes stress, which impacts performance. And it's counterintuitive, but the more accomplished you are, the more the effect would show up. So, for example, with university students, if they told young women in college that, oh, the math exam that they're about to take has been found to be gender neutral, they did better. But when
Right.
they somehow implied that girls, women tend to struggle with this, then they did worse, right? Because it kind of reminded them of the stereotype. And there's similar examples with men in sports and things like that. So those things do really matter.
Yeah, so for ourselves, reminding ourselves of the context that we live within our own lives is so important, isn't it? So we can understand how this might impact us.
Well, it goes back to this whole conversation about people who see it only as something about feeling unworthy. And I think Michelle Obama, who famously talked about her own imposter syndrome, I don't think she feels unworthy. I think she understands the pressure of being the first Black woman first lady of the United States, and that she now represents all other African Americans. I mean, that's a pretty heavy burden to have to carry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
Pressure, a lot of
So
pressure.
you run your own business. Sorry,
I
you
do.
run your own business. You spend time teaching, speaking, writing. You have a great TED talk, and you have obvious success in your career. Do you still experience imposter syndrome yourself? And what do you do to manage that if you do?
Honestly, I don't. And let me tell you why. And let me be clear, it doesn't mean I don't have performance anxiety.
Yeah.
I just got asked to be on a podcast. I don't do you know who Paula Poundstone is? She's a well-known comedian in the US, so a lot of people know her here. So I just literally today got asked to be on her podcast. Or if Oprah called tomorrow, right? I would be very anxious. At first, I think like, what am I going to wear? And then I think like, what do I know? Right. So these thoughts would run through my head.
I love that you go to what am I going to wear before you you go to what do I know?
Well, they're all kind of, mixed together in there, but all those things kind of wrap up, especially for women. But it's like this very this momentary, this kind of fleeting thought, right? To me, it's about being able to talk yourself down more quickly.
Yeah.
You mentioned that TED talk. That was we were given 6 minutes. It's actually more difficult to do a 6 minute, like beginning, middle, end, than the 18 minutes most people get. It was at TED headquarters in front of other TED speakers. One of the most stressful things I'd ever done in my life. I spent hundreds of hours writing it, timing it, practicing it, and I wanted to crush it. Like we know what it feels like, no matter what your work is, to like walk away and go, like, nailed it, right? I
Yeah.
did not have that feeling when I walked off that stage. Matter of fact, in the middle of it, it's not clear to people watching, but I lost my train of thought. And I kind of quickly said something and just threw something in and then kind of got back on track. But it was stressful. So I was telling
Mm.
that to a group when I was doing a talk, and someone said, "Oh, so you felt like an imposter?" And I said, "No, I was disappointed. I didn't feel
Yeah.
like I'd fooled anybody. I didn't discount my previous accomplishments or knowledge or abilities. In other words, I wasn't externalizing my success. I was disappointed." And for them, that was this big aha moment that you can be crushingly disappointed, but not ashamed, which is more the imposter syndrome piece.
Yeah. I think that's really important that you mentioned that because they are so different, aren't they? And you certainly wouldn't notice that you were feeling that performance anxiety or that you had lost your train of thought through your TED talk. And this is the other thing, isn't it? I think oftentimes we experience something, but the people watching us don't know that's happening.
Absolutely. I hadn't thought of this for a long, long time until you said that. But one of the first presentations I ever made was as a graduate student. I was asked to go a week before I was expecting to. Somebody was sick. They said, "Can you give your talk?" I gave my talk. We were videotaped. My hands were shaking. My voice was shaking. When we watched the tape, you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that I experience it, but they don't necessarily see it. So you're right. And to me, it comes to kind of a core tool, which is to keep going regardless of how you feel. In other words, I see so many people waiting to start their business or get their art into a gallery or go for a promotion. They're waiting until they feel more confident. But you know this
Mm,
as a psychologist, that's not how it works. That feelings are the last to
no,
change. You have to change your
yeah.
thoughts first, then your behaviors, even though you don't believe the new thoughts, but act like you believe them. And over time, the
Mm,
feelings and the confidence will catch up.
yeah, absolutely. Great advice. So, could you share with us what you think are some of the most important factors in terms of taking care of yourself as someone who has many roles and I imagine a busy life?
Yeah, I should have some really good answers for you, but I work really hard. I don't exercise enough. I do have a very strong support network of friends and so on, but I wish I could say, I'm this wonderful role model for self-care and wellness, but I fall into the same traps that a lot of other people do, especially being self-employed.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to always say to me, "Did you get all your work done today?" And I'd say, yeah, I would just say yes, 'cause it was easier, right? Because our work is
Yeah.
never done these days.
Yeah. Look, I think running businesses, like you say, particularly being self-employed, is tricky. And we all know the sort of things. Like you could reel them off, like I should be working less and I should be exercising more. And we know these things, but it's not easy, is it, to be doing that all the time? But being in business isn't always easy, whether we're experiencing imposter syndrome or not. How important have you found having a support system? You mentioned that you've got a good support system around you whilst running your business, and what do you find most helpful about that?
I think that's absolutely critical, especially for self-bossers or aspiring self-bossers and entrepreneurs. But it's also surrounding yourselves with the right people. I'm probably not going
Mm.
to get this quote right, but it was by Rumi, and it's something like he was a Persian philosopher who was something like
One of my favorites.
when embarking on a journey, never ask for directions from someone who's never left home, something to that effect. And so often, we talk to the wrong people about our business ideas, and if you're talking to people who've been an employee their whole life, they don't know how to help you. And I know there's a lot of people out there who say, just get rid of all those negative people in your life, just cut them out of your life. And I think, well, I liked my grandmother, you know, but she didn't. But she had the same job for 50 years. So if I would talk about quitting my corporate job, she was not going to be supportive. She could not
Yeah.
help me. And then I
Mm.
realized it also matters who not to go to. I could talk to her about the price of tomatoes or the weather, but not this. So find other people who are doing or have done the thing that you want to do. Um, I think it's a great idea to have like a Monday morning meeting with somebody. They could be in a completely different business, especially if you're
Yeah.
self-employed, you're a solo practitioner, and meet every Monday for an hour and have a business meeting. Here's what I'm going to do this week. Here's where I'm struggling, and use that person for support, or join a local group, or work with a coach who can really keep you on track and help you work through the tough spots.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points there. And, different people in our lives can be there for different reasons. And it's not about having to get rid of people in your life, particularly, is it? It's just about being really wise about actually, do I talk to those particular people about certain aspects of my life? And if it is around business, like you say, if somebody's employed and they've always been employed, it's not that they're not well meaning in what they would share with you or try and help you with, but they come from a different context. So,
Yeah.
really surrounding yourself with other people who are in business and are doing um, not necessarily the same type of business, but the same sorts of things they're coming up against because they run businesses. And also, I think having people around that you can just have some fun with and not think about business and take some
Oh,
time away as well.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And sometimes it's a relief to be around people who aren't in business because you're not always talking about it, and you can just enjoy and chat about all kinds of other things. Take your mind off it.
Yeah. Fantastic. So I ask this question to everybody that comes on the podcast, and I'm always curious about their answer. So if you could meet your 80-year-old self, what do you think she would say to you?
Well done.
Well done. Uh,
I
yeah.
hope.
Oh,
You
I
you
would
get
imagine.
you get this one, this one time around, and, I love that question, and I wanna give it more of a think, but that's the first thing that came to mind is I hope. It's just those 2 words, "Well done."
I can only imagine that she would. I mean, the work that you've done, the work around diversity, equity, inclusion, the work around imposter syndrome has undoubtedly touched many, many, many lives throughout that span of your work already. I'm sure there's many other things you've done in your life outside of those that, I don't know about and other people don't necessarily know about, but the people in your life would know about. So, yeah, I think that's really lovely. So, if people wanted to find out more about you or get in touch, where can they find you and engage with you and your work? And I'll put some links in the show notes as well.
Sure, it could not be easier. because I'm at impostersyndrome.com.
Very easy to find you, which is great. And well, you're on Twitter because that's how I reached out to you on Twitter. And are you on any other social media
Yeah,
platforms?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and for many years I was mostly on Facebook. Not on Facebook very much anymore. Mostly, friend and family kinds of things. But I've kind of really switched over to LinkedIn, so that would be just my name, Valerie Young. And there's also a page for Impostor Syndrome Institute as well, and there we share kinds of articles and research and perspective and insight as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So if you could distill it down, and I know this can be tricky, but into one piece of advice, what would you want our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
I was going to say it's not tricky, but it is. Let me just tell you a really quick story. I was in this program. I'd spent an obscene amount of money to be in this program for speakers to kind of up level their business. And we were to come up with our point of view. What is your POV? What is your point of view? And people really struggled with that to make what makes you unique? What is your message that's different than other people's? And I would write paragraphs and paragraphs. And the guy who's the coach, he's like, no, that's not it. Nobody cares about that. That's not different. That's not new. And I finally said, the only way to stop feeling like an imposter is to stop thinking like an imposter. And he said, that's it. And he said, now that wasn't hard, was it? I said, frankly, obviously it was, because it took me months to kind of distill it down to that. But to me, it is that the only way to stop thinking like stop feeling like an imposter, rather stop thinking like an imposter, and to become what I refer to as a humble realist. Somebody who is genuinely humble, but has never experienced imposter syndrome, who thinks differently about competence, has a realistic understanding of what it means to be competent, has a healthy response to failure, mistakes, constructive feedback, and understands that fear and self-doubt go with the achievement territory. That's what a humble realist is.
Yeah. So not thinking like an imposter, humble realism, understanding the context you're in so that we can realize that actually this is maybe why we're feeling so much like an imposter. Fantastic. Valerie, this has been so lovely to chat to you. Again, I'm just thrilled. In life, you just don't know. And I think I put that in the tweet. If you don't ask, you don't get. And you said, absolutely, you don't. And yes, I'm happy to come on your podcast. So again, there could have been a part of me that's like, who am I to reach out to people I don't know and ask them to come on my podcast? But I did it anyway. And I'm really, really thrilled that you've come on. And I think there's some really helpful information for our listeners here. Thank you so much for your time, your generosity, and your wisdom.
I'm glad you asked. You're right. If you don't ask, you don't get. And you're inspiring me to tag Michelle Obama. And
Oh,
I
fantastic.
want her to be my new best friend.
I love that. I love that you're going to do that. That's fantastic. Please, please do that.
I will.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for sharing this time with me today. I hope your time here was helpful and supportive. If there has been something in this episode that you found helpful, I invite you to share it with another person you think might benefit. I'd also love it if you'd leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you tune in. Ratings and reviews really help to increase awareness of podcasts, meaning I can spread helpful information more widely. All reviews are welcome and much appreciated, as I know they take time out of your day. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode airs, please use the link in the show notes to join my mailing list. Music and editing by Nissa Ray. Thanks, Nissa. I wish you all well in your relationship with yourself, and may you go well and go gently.